Hi, this is Brashchek and recording this on March 22nd. We're going to be reading an article, and the reason we're reading this article is it appeared on the Medium website. It had 2.5 million views, and then Medium took it down. And I just linked to it from Twitter, and when you click on the Twitter link, Twitter, I guess they've done this before. I've clicked on a lot of links in my day. Twitter feels it necessary to tell you that this article is unsafe. So I'm going to read it to you in case it disappears. By the way, we're getting some emails from people asking us if we need help. Thank you. We don't. Don't forget about us in the long run. You know, we are viewer and listener supported. But right now, look around your community and spend the money helping the people who are getting whacked by this. So we're going to be just fine. But in the long run, remember who was there for you when so many other outlets were not. But right now, look close to home, help those people. We're going to be absolutely fine. But thank you very much for asking. Okay, so I'm going to read this article for you. It's by someone named Ginn, Ginn, and I'm going to read the preamble. After falling under much scrutiny, Medium has deleted Ginn's post. Of note, Ginn is a former 2012 digital campaign staffer with no background in medicine or infectious disease. Okay? We're leaving it up to anyone who wants to read, while also including a thread from a biologist who has debunked it. Here's what the biologist says. I hate to invest precious time on taking apart the atrocious article pictured below, but it is getting too much traction here, even in traditional media. My thread could be far longer than it is, but I'm doing my best only to discuss the most glaring flaws. So that comes from an expert. He may, in fact, be a legitimate expert, but you have to realize that experts get a paycheck. And not just this pandemic, but every single problem our society faces, that people that get paychecks, they know how to salute the flag, no matter what's going on. We got more prisoners in U.S. prisons than in any other country in the world by a factor of 10. Salute that flag. It must be okay. We're spending trillions of dollars destroying the lives of people in the Middle East, killing millions of them, displacing tens of millions of them. Salute that flag, boy. It's all good. It's all good. We have a Fed that pumps trillions of dollars to pay the gambling debts of reckless banks that have, if they profited, they would have taken the money to the bank, right? But since they're losing, we have to bail them out. Just salute that flag. So when an expert appears on TV and they're telling you how everything that everyone else is saying is wrong and we should just go with the flow, just keep that in mind about the experts. So anyway, here's this person, Ginn. After watching the outbreak of COVID-19 for the past 2 months, I followed the pace of the infection, its severity, and how our world is tackling the virus. While we should be concerned and diligent, this situation has dramatically elevated to a mob-like fear spreading faster than COVID-19 itself. When 13% of Americans believe they are currently infected with COVID-19, mathematically impossible, full-on panic is blocking our ability to think clearly and determine how to deploy our resources to stop this virus. Over 3/4 of Americans are scared of what we are doing to our society through law and hysteria, not of infection or spreading COVID-19 to those most vulnerable. The following article is a systematic overview of COVID. By the way, he's saying that this is serious. We have to think. We have to deploy our resources. And he doesn't say that we have to look after the most vulnerable, but I think if we're intelligent, the most vulnerable would be the ones that benefit. The following article is a systematic overview of COVID-19 driven by data from medical professionals and academic circles that will help you understand what is going on. Sources include the CDC, the World Health Organization, National Health Institute, NHS, University of Oxford, Stanford, Harvard, NEJM, JAMA, and several others. I'm quite experienced at understanding virality and how things grow, and data. In my vocation, I'm most known for popularizing the growth hacking movement in Silicon Valley that specializes in driving rapid and virtual adoption of technology products. Data is data. Our focus here isn't treatments, but numbers. You don't need a special degree to understand what the data says and doesn't say. Numbers are universal. I hope you walk away with a more informed perspective on how you can help and fight back against the hysteria that is driving our country into a dark place. You can help us focus our scarce resources on those who are most vulnerable and who need our help. I want to say that again, and we've been saying that. You can help us focus our scarce resources on those who are most vulnerable and who need our help. How could a article written with that philosophy be pulled from Medium, and how could Twitter be blocking you from clicking to it? But they are. So, total cases are the wrong metric. A critical question to ask yourself when you first look at a data set is, what is our metric for success? I wish I could show you these screens. Maybe my assistant can help me do that. Let's start at the top. How is it possible that more than 20% of Americans believe they will catch COVID-19? Here's how. Vanity metrics, a single data point with no context. Wouldn't this picture scare you? Look at all those red, scary circles, large red, scary circles. And I've noticed that. I'm sure you've noticed that. If you haven't, take a look. They don't just show us the numbers. They take a graphic, they take a map of the world, and then they put red dots all over it. Okay? Really good for generating viewership. Really bad for conveying useful information. These images come from the now infamous Johns Hopkins COVID-19 tracking map. What started as a data transparency effort has now molded into an unintentional tool for hysteria and panic. I can tell you stories about Johns Hopkins. I know a little bit about the nature of that organization. Can I say this? When the new guy became CEO, Warren Buffett sent his private plane to fly the guy to Bill Gates' house so they could read him how things were going to be. That's how it works. That's a real story. That's really how things happen. Anyway, an important question to ask yourself is, what do these bubbles actually mean? Each bubble represents the total number of COVID-19 cases per country. The situation looks serious, yet we know that the virus is over 4 months old. So how many of these cases are active? Okay, if 90% of the people who got this walked away from it, but they're still counting every case as active and having it grow and grow, these circles grow and grow and grow on the map, that's a problem. Immediately, we now see that just under half of those terrifying red bubbles aren't relevant or actionable. The total number of cases isn't illustrative of what we should do now. This is a single vanity data point with no context. It isn't information or knowledge. To know how to respond, we need more numbers to tell a story and to paint the full picture. As a metaphor, the daily revenue of a business doesn't tell you a whole lot about profitability, capital structure, or overhead. The same goes for the total number of cases. The data isn't actionable. We need to look at ratios and percentages to tell us what to do next. Conversion rate, growth rate, and severity. Time-lapsing new cases gives us perspective. Breaking down each country by the date of the first infection helps us track the growth and impact of the virus. We can see how total cases are growing against a consistent time scale. Here are the new case time lapsed by country and data of the first 100 cases. So hopefully my assistant has just found this slide and is putting it up for you to look at. Here is a better picture of U.S. confirmed daily case growth. That's the next slide. Hopefully that's up there, we'll hope. The United States is tracking with other European nations at doubling every 3 days or so. As we measure and test more Americans, this will continue to grow. Our time-lapse growth is slower than China, but not as good as South Korea, Japan, Singapore, or Taiwan. All are considered models of how to beat COVID-19. The U.S. is performing average, not great, compared to other countries by this metric. Still, there is a massive blind spot with this type of graph. None of these charts are weighted on a per capita basis. It treats every country as a single entity. As we will see, this fails to tell us what is going on in several aspects. So this is something that Braschek pointed out way back in January. China has 4 times as many or 5 times as many people as the U.S. So when you see a number in China, you have to realize they've got that many more people than us. So the number looks big, and it is big, and it is concerning, but it has to be looked, everything has to be looked at on a per capita basis, per head basis. On a per capita basis, we shouldn't be panicking. Every country has a different population size, which skews aggregate and cumulative case comparisons. By controlling for population, you can properly weigh the number of cases in the context of the local population size. Viruses don't acknowledge our human borders. The U.S. population is 5.5 times greater than Italy, 6 times greater than South Korea, and just 25% the size of China. So China's 4 times bigger than us. Comparing the U.S. total of cases in absolute terms is rather silly, and he's being polite. Rank ordering based on the total number of cases shows that the U.S. on a per capita basis is significantly lower than the top 6 nations by case volume. On a million citizen per capita basis, the U.S. moves to above mid-pack of all countries and rising, with similar case volume as Singapore, 385 cases, Cyprus, 75 cases, and the UK, 3,983 cases. This is data as of March 20th, 2020. So hopefully you're looking at the correct slide right now. But total cases, even on a per capita basis, will always be a losing metric. The denominator, total population, is more or less fixed. We aren't having babies at the pace of viral growth. Per capita won't explain how fast the virus is moving and if it is truly exponential. Look at the numbers. Don't let the news media and the professional fearmongers, television fearmongers, experts, grifters, terrorize you. COVID-19 is spreading, but probably not accelerating. Growth rates are tricky to track over time. Smaller numbers are easier to move than large numbers. This is so important. You know, if there's 2 cases now and there's 4 cases tomorrow, you can say, oh my God, if the caseload is up 100%. But there's only 2 more cases. As an example, GDP growth of 3% for the U.S. means billions of dollars, while 3% for Bermuda means millions. Generally, growth rates decline over time, but the nominal increase may still be significant. This holds true of daily confirmed case increases. Daily growth rates declined over time across all countries, regardless of particular policy solutions such as shutting borders or social distancing. So a lot of countries, what does that say? A lot of countries are doing a lot of different things. But when you look at their charts, their growth of cases, they are all slowing regardless of what they're doing. So I hope Ramjay's showing that site. But that screen now. The daily growth data across the world is a little noisy. Watching daily growth of confirmed cases by a relative daily growth factor cleans up the picture. More than 1 is increasing, and below 1 is declining. For all of March, the world has hovered around 1.1 growth. This translates to an average daily growth rate of 10% with ups and downs on a daily basis. This isn't great, but it is good news as COVID-19 most likely isn't increasing in virality. Everything about life is the rate of growth. Is it increasing? Is it declining? That's not a complex topic. It's just something you have to be aware of and have a little experience with. But take it on, I'm asking you to take that one thing on faith. It's the rate of growth, whether it's a virus or the amount of people unemployed or the amount of money you have in the bank or anything. It's the rate of growth that you need to be tracking. Not, I mean, absolute growth is important too, but it's the rate of change in the rate of growth. The growth rate of the growth rate of the growth rate is approximately 10%. Okay? However, the data is quite noisy. With inconsistent country-to-country reporting and and here's the key, we've been saying this since day one, and what qualifies as a confirmed case, the more likely explanation is that we are increasing our measurement, but the virus hasn't increased in viral capability. Recommended containment and prevention strategies are still quite effective at stopping the spread. And now we're going to have this chart called growth factor outside of China. Cases globally are increasing. It is a virus after all, but beware of believing metrics designed to intentionally scare, like, quote, cases are doubling. These are typically small numbers over small numbers and sliced on a per country basis. Globally, COVID-19's growth rate is rather steady. Remember, viruses ignore our national boundaries. Viruses don't grow infinitely and forever. As with most things in nature, viruses follow a common pattern, the bell curve. And now we've got the bell curve graphic that should be up. Watch the bell curve. As COVID-19 spreads and declines, which it will, despite what the media tells you, every country will follow a similar pattern. The following is a more detailed graph of South Korea's successful defeat of COVID-19 compared also to China with thousands of more cases and deaths. It is a bell curve. Okay? There are people, otherwise intelligent, I guess, who have been following the stock market, who until a couple of weeks ago thought the stock market was going to go up forever because it was going up. Therefore, it will go up forever. World markets don't work that way, and pandemics don't work that way. Never have, never will. If they did work that way, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would have been wiped out by a pandemic a long time ago. We haven't been. Here is a more detailed graph of South Korea graphed against the total number of cases. Here's a graph from Italy showing the bell curve in symptom onset and number of cases, which may point to the beginning of the end for Italy, the beginning of the end of the hottest period of the pandemic, not the end of Italy, okay? Bell curves are the dominant trait of outbreaks. And by the way, this guy is linking to the Journal of American Medicine. I mean, he's not pulling these things out of thin air, okay? So have you heard anything unreasonable or anything wacky or anything conspiracy theory or anything crazy or anything dangerous? I don't think you have. We'll keep reading. Maybe it'll come up. Bell curves is the dominant trait of outbreaks. A virus doesn't grow linearly forever. It accelerates, it plateaus, and then declines. Just like and I'm adding this, just like every other freaking thing on the planet. Whether it is our environmental or our own efforts, viruses accelerate and quickly decline. This fact of nature is represented in Farr's law. CDCs of bend the curve or flatten the curve reflect this natural reality. So here's the CDC chart. In the outbreak of an epidemic, early countermeasures are important. It is important to note that in both scenarios, the total number of COVID-19 cases will be similar. Flattening the curve focus is a shock to the healthcare system, which can increase fatalities due to capacity constraints. Just what I said. In the long term, it isn't infection prevention. Unfortunately, flattening the curve doesn't include the other downsides and costs of execution. Both the CDC and the World Health Organization are optimizing virality and healthcare utilization while ignoring the economic shock to our system. Both organizations assume you are going to get affected eventually, and it won't be that bad. Okay, let's go deeper into this. A low probability of catching COVID-19. The World Health Organization released a study of how China responded to COVID-19. Currently, the study is one of the most exhaustive pieces published on how the virus spreads. The results of their research show that COVID-19 doesn't spread as easily as we thought or the media had us believe. Remember, people abandoned their dogs out of fear of getting infected. According to the WHO report, if you come in contact with someone who tests positive for COVID-19, you have a 1 to 5% chance of catching it as well. Your chances are 1 to 5%. The variability is large. 1 to 5% is a huge variability, even though it seems like small numbers. Proportionally, it's massive, but it's still only 1 to 5%. The variability is large because the infection is based on the type of contact and how long. So in Korea, we had some nut job with a raging case of this disease, insist on going to church and hugging every single member. Yeah, she did a good job of spreading it, okay? Most of us are not going out there spending hours and hours in a room with a bunch of people, closed air, and hugging them. Anyway, back to the article. The majority of viral infections come from prolonged exposure in confined spaces with other infected individuals. I'm going to say it again. The majority of this is from the World Health Organization, not a conspiracy theory. The majority of viral infections come from prolonged exposures in confined spaces with other infected individuals. One more time. Prolonged exposures. Not walking past somebody on the street. Confined spaces. Okay? Not outdoors. With other infected individuals. That's where the majority of the infections come from. Person to person and surface contact is by far the most common cause. From the WHO report, when a cluster of several infected people occurred in China, it was most often 78 to 85% caused by an infection within the family by droplets and other carriers of infection in close contact with an infected person. So you got to be hanging out with somebody in a prolonged, not just hang out with somebody who's got it for a prolonged period in a closed space. That's where 78 to 85% of the infections came from. From the CDC study on transmission in China and Princess Cruise outbreak. And that Princess Cruise thing, critical data, because it's like a little petri dish of how this thing actually works in reality. A growing body of evidence indicates that COVID-19 transmission is facilitated in confined settings. For example, a large cluster, 634 confirmed cases of COVID-19 secondary infections, occurred aboard a cruise ship in Japan, representing about 1/5 of the persons aboard who were tested for the virus. This indicates the high transmissibility of COVID-19 in closed spaces. So don't get into an enclosed space with lots of people. Dr. Paul Auwaerter, the clinical director for the Division of Infectious Diseases at Johns Hopkins University of Medicine, echoes this finding. If you have a COVID-19 patient in your household, your risk of developing the infection is about 10%. If you were casually exposed to the virus in the workplace, you were not locked up in a conference room for 6 hours with somebody who was infected, your chance of infection is about 0.5%. Okay? So let me give you those numbers again so you can grasp them. If somebody in your house has the infection, you have a 10% chance of catching it from them. If you just went to work and were just hanging out with people, not working in a hospital, not sitting in some idiotic corporate conference for 8 hours, your chance of getting this is 0.5%. According to Dr. Auwaerter, these transmission rates are very similar to the seasonal flu. Air-based transmission or untraceable community spread is very unlikely. According to WHO's COVID-19 lead, that's the study we've just been talking about, Maria von Kerkhoff, true community-based spreading is very rare. True community-based spreading is very rare. True community-based spreading is very rare. The data from China shows that community-based spreading was only a very small handful of cases. Quote, this virus is not circulating in the community, even in the highest incident areas across China. End of quote. The World Health Organization. Quote, transmission by fine aerosols in the air over long distance is not one of the main causes of spread. Most of the 2,055 infected hospital workers were either infected at home or in the early phases of the outbreak in Wuhan when hospital safeguards were not yet raised. End of quote. True community spread involves transmission where people get infected in public spaces, and there is no way to trace back the source of infection. So when they're talking about community spread, it's got to be in a public space, and there's no other way to trace it. In other words, well, we don't know how this guy got it. It's a total mystery. Well, you know what? We know how he got it. He was in a conference room with 10 other people that had it. He was on a cruise ship. He was in a hospital. Generally, people are not getting this out of the blue. World Health Organization believes that is not what the China data shows. If community spread was super common, it wouldn't be possible to reduce new cases through social distancing. So new cases are being reduced. They're being reduced through social distancing, and that is evidence that this can be stopped, slowed by people not coming together. Okay, next quote, very important. And again, this is coming from the Director General of the World Health Organization. Now, there is shady operation in a lot of ways, but I guess if you read their fine print, they're actually telling the truth. We have never seen before a respiratory pathogen that's capable of community transmission, but at the same time, which can also be contained with right measures. If this was an influenza epidemic, we would have expected to see widespread community transmission across the globe by now. And efforts to slow it down would not be feasible. So if this was in the air, none of the stuff that we're doing would be working, and the stuff we're doing is working. The question is, this is a sidebar, can the U.S. and other countries have to do their own math? These shutdowns are going to cost the U.S. $1 trillion a month. Anyway, an author of a working paper from the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Princeton University said, quote, the current scientific consensus is that most transmission via respiratory secretions happen in the form of large respiratory droplets rather than small aerosols. Droplets, unfortunately, are heavy enough that they don't travel very far and instead fall from the air. But fortunately, they don't travel very far, and instead they fall from the air traveling only a few feet. That's why staying a little bit away from people is not a bad idea. Do you have to be 1,000 miles from them? No. The media was put into a frenzy. This is a quote from the article, but I'm going to say the media put itself into a frenzy because it was profitable for the media to do so. And we've seen, I am no fan of Donald Trump. I've been following that joker since the 1970s. I mean, he's got some good qualities, but he's got a lot of horrible qualities. I'm no fan. But to use this thing every night, Rachel Maddow and all you other idiots, as a political thing, absolutely despicable. And I hope this is the end of your careers, but it probably won't be. Anyway, the media was put into a frenzy when the authors released their study on COVID-19's ability to survive in the air. The study did find the virus could survive in the air for a couple of hours. However, the study was designed as an academic exercise rather than a real-world test. This study put COVID-19 into a spray bottle to mist it in the air. I don't know anybody who coughs in mist form, and it is unclear if the viral load was large enough to infect another individual. As one doctor who wants to remain anonymous told me, quote, Corona doesn't have wings. And, before this happened, I rail against the medical profession, and I still rail against them. You guys need to grow a spine, and you need to come out and start telling the truth about the system that you've been trapped in. You didn't create this system. You wanted to be a doctor. You worked your ass off to go to medical school. You mortgaged your future. You had to put up all kinds of money just to go into practice. And then you found out you were working in a gulag run by money interests. And those money interests are really straight up and clear. If we can make a buck on it, we're going to do it. If we can't make a buck on it, we're not going to let people know it exists. And if they start to figure out that it exists, we're going to ridicule them. And if that doesn't work, we're going to go after them. And there are many good, heroic doctors out there who had healing protocols for all kinds of diseases. And some of them are still out there practicing. And they are harassed with a viciousness you can't even imagine. But the majority of people in the medical profession keep their heads down. They're good Germans. And maybe this is going to shake everybody up. I hope it does. Anyway, common transmission surfaces. COVID-19's ability to live for a long time is limited on most surfaces, and it is quite easy to kill with typical household cleaners, just like the normal flu. COVID-19 can be detected on copper after 4 hours and 24 hours on cardboard. COVID-19 survived best on plastic, of course, and stainless steel, remaining viable for up to 72 hours. COVID-19 is very vulnerable to UV light and heat. Sunshine. Presence doesn't mean infectious. The viral concentration falls significantly over time. So in that, let's say it's on a piece of steel and it's viable for 72 hours, it doesn't stay 100% viable for 72 hours and then poof, vanish. It goes into decline. The virus showed a half-life of about 0.8 hours on copper, 3.46 hours on cardboard, 5.6 hours on steel, and 6 hours on plastic. So that means even if it's viable or if it's present on steel for 72 hours, within 5.6 hours, the first 5.6 hours, it's half gone. All right, and then it just declines continuously after that. According to Dylan Morris, one of the authors, quote, "We do not know how much virus is actually needed to infect a human being with high probability, nor how easily the virus is transferred from the cardboard to one's hand when touching a package. According to Dr. Werter, it's thought that this virus can survive on surfaces such as hands, hard surfaces, and fabrics. Preliminary data indicates up to 72 hours on hard surfaces like steel and plastic and up to 12 hours on fabric. COVID-19 will likely, quote, burn off in the summer. Due to COVID-19's sensitivity to UV light and heat, just like the normal influenza virus, it is very likely it will, quote, burn off as humidity increases and temperatures rise. Released on March 10th, one study mapped COVID-19 viral capability by high temperature and high humidity. It found that both significantly reduced the ability of the virus to spread from person to person from the study. Quote, "The result is consistent with the fact that the high temperature and high humidity significantly reduce the transmission of influenza. It indicates that the arrival of summer and the rainy season in the northern hemisphere can effectively reduce the transmission of COVID-19. The University of Maryland mapped the COVID-19 outbreaks with local weather patterns around the world from the U.S. to China. They found that the virus thrives in certain temperatures and humidity channels. And you can see it. Italy, China, Iran, New York City area of the United States. They were all in the same band. The researchers found that all cities experiencing significant outbreaks of COVID-19 have very similar winter climates, with an average temperature of 41 to 52 degrees Fahrenheit, an average humidity level of 47 to 79, with a narrow east-west distribution along the same 30 to 50 northern latitude, said the University of Maryland. Quote, "Based on what we have documented so far, it appears that the virus has a harder time spreading between people in tropical warm climates," said the leader, Mohammed Sajidi, MD, Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Maryland, a physician and a scientist, at the Institute of Human Virology. Okay, not a conspiracy theorist. In the image below, the zone at risk for a significant community spread in the near term includes the areas within the green bands. And it's North Europe, including Spain, Italy, England, U.S., big swath of the heavily populated parts of the U.S. Not so bad in Central and South America, not so bad in Africa. Children and teens aren't at risk. It is already well established that the young aren't particularly vulnerable. Now, before we go on with reading this, if you're following the news, what the news is doing is they're going out and finding the most unlikely possible person to get this. And it does happen. There are always anomalies. People get hit by lightning. People win the lottery. Weird stuff happens. And they're taking that young, healthy person and saying, oh my God, look at this young, healthy person. They got it. Everyone's going to get it. It's the end of the world. In one case, if you watch the interview with this young, healthy person carefully, you'll see that she was a smoker. Okay? There's another young, healthy person who they're trumpeting, and she was the CEO of a company. And she said, I got sick, but I thought it was just a cold, so I kept on working. Right? For a CEO, that might, especially at startup, that might mean 12 to 14 to 16-hour work days, 7 days a week. She may have worked herself into not being able to throw the thing off. So be careful of these news reports. And I got to tell you about another one. I think I mentioned earlier. There's a family tragic. They look like in their group photo. They look like absolutely lovely people. They had a party. Somebody came who had this disease. They were in close contact. I'm half Italian. They're Italian. I'm sure they were hugging and kissing each other. That's how we are. And he spread it to everybody, and 4 of them so far have died. And I'm not being mean. Find the photograph of the family. The front line, people in the front line, the ladies, they're not just a little overweight. I mean, they are not, I'm sure they're lovely people. But you have to be real. If you're 100 to 150 pounds overweight, there's no standard by which that is healthy. And these folks were hitting that. You can see it. You don't need to be like a research scientist to just look at a photograph and see that somebody is way tipping the scales. And those are the people who died. So it's well established that the young aren't particularly vulnerable. In fact, there isn't a single death reported below the age of 10 in the world. Most children who test positive don't show symptoms. As well, infection rates are lower for individuals below the age of 19, which is similar to SARS and MERS, COVID-19 sister viruses. According to the WHO, COVID-19 mission in China, only 8.1% of cases were 20-somethings, 1.2% were teens, and 0.9% were 9 or younger. As of the study, late February 20th, 78% of the cases reported were ages 30 to 69. So that's 78%. The WHO hypothesizes this is for a biological reason and isn't related to lifestyle or exposure. Okay. I saw the Ministry of Health, Italy's Ministry of Health, and they had 78% had some kind of illness. So even when we looked at households, we did not find a single example of a child bringing the infection into the household and transmitting it to the parents. It was the other way around. And the children tend to have a mild disease. Then Kerhove. This is the World Health Organization. Let me read this again. When we looked at households, we did not find a single example of a child bringing the infection into a household and transmitting to parents. It was the other way around. The parents were transmitting to the children, and the children tend to have mild diseases. According to a Wall Street Journal article, Children have a near zero chance of becoming ill. They are more likely to get normal flu than COVID-19. A World Health Organization report on China concluded that COVID-19 in children were, quote, relatively rare and mild. Cases, this is just, he's just saying the same thing 10 different ways, and bless him for doing that. And he's getting this from the World Health Organization, from the Journal of American Medicine. Why was this article removed from Medium? Why is Twitter telling people who click on the link that is I forget the word they use, but basically dangerous article? A strong but unknown viral effect. While the true viral capacity is unknown at this moment, it is theorized that COVID-19 is more than a seasonal flu, but less than other viruses. The average number of people to which a single infected person will transmit the virus is as low, the number that they use all the time, is as low as 1.5 to a high of 3. How contagious is a disease? Scientists use the R0, or the R0, naught is 0, to estimate, or not, R0, to estimate how many other people one sick person is likely to affect. Okay, so let's look at some diseases here. COVID, each person on the average is likely to infect 2 to 3.1, assuming you're in close contact with them in a closed space. We had a disease called Zika down in Colombia and Brazil. Each person will infect 3 to 6.6 on average. Measles, very contagious. Each person will infect 11 to 18. Ebola, each person will infect 2. HIV, this is a study from the Réunion Island, 3.6 to 3.7. Seasonal flu, 1.3. The norovirus, 1.6 to 3.7. Newer analysis suggests that the viral rate is declining. According to Nobel laureate and biophysicist Michael Levitt, the infection rate is declining. Let's see, he's a Nobel laureate, he's a biophysicist, but let's call all these people conspiracy theorists. And let's ban this article from the internet. Let's make sure no one reads any of these things. Okay, here's what Levitt said. Every coronavirus patient in China infected on average 2.2 people a day, spelling exponential growth that can only lead to disaster. But then it started dropping, and the number of new daily infections is now close to 0. He compared it to interest rates. Even if the interest rate keeps dropping, you still make money. The sum you invested does not lessen, it just grows more slowly. When discussing diseases, it frightens people a lot because they keep hearing about new cases every day. But the fact that the infection rate is slowing down means the end of the pandemic is near. Now, maybe Nobel Prize people will take back Michael Levitt's Nobel Prize for daring to talk about mathematics. What about asymptomatic spread? The majority of cases see symptoms within a few days, not 2 weeks as originally reported. The majority of cases see symptoms within a few days, not 2 weeks as originally reported. On true asymptomatic spread, that means you don't have symptoms, the data is still unclear because how do you know? You don't know if the person's sick, but increasingly unlikely. 2 studies point to a low infection rate for pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals. So the question is, are asymptomatic people, they've been talking, and if you watch the media carefully, they talk about carriers. He's an asymptomatic, he doesn't have symptoms, but he's a carrier. And he's spreading it all over. No. The data is unclear, but it's increasingly unlikely that asymptomatic people are spreading this. 2 studies point to a low infection rate from pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals. One study said 10% of infections come from people who don't show symptoms yet. Another WHO study reported 1.2 of confirmed cases were truly asymptomatic. Several studies confirmed asymptomatic spread have ended up disproven. It is important to note that there is a difference between, quote, never showing symptoms and, quote, pre-symptomatic. And the media is promoting an unproven narrative. almost all people end up in the latter camp within 5 days. That means, let's see, almost all people end up in the latter camp within 5 days, almost never the former. It is very unlikely for individuals with COVID-19 to never show symptoms. You show something. You're tired. You have a fever. You're a little short of breath. WHO and CDC claim that asymptomatic spread isn't a concern and quite rare. So in other words, if you've got it, but it's not showing symptoms, you're probably not going to spread it. When you know you've got something, and then there's a chance that you might spread it. So that's why you should stay home from work. Iceland is leading global in testing its entire population of 300,000 for asymptomatic spread, and not just those that show symptoms. They randomly tested 1,800 citizens who don't show symptoms, and as far as they knew, were not exposed to positive individuals. Of this sample, only 19 tested positive for COVID-19, or 1.1% of the sample. Obviously, this type of viral spread is the most concerning. However, based on the level of media attention and the global size of positive infections, it seems more probable we keep looking for a COVID viral trait that just doesn't exist. Another way of looking at virality and asymptomatic spread, people without symptoms, is the number of flight attendants, airport staff, or pilots who have tested positive for COVID-19. Out of the thousands of flights since November 2019, only a handful of airport and airline staff have tested positive, such as some American Airlines pilots, some BA staff, British Airways, and several TSA employees. Outside of medical and hospital staff, these individuals are in greatest contact with infected persons in confined spaces. Despite having no protective gear, right? The pilots don't have protective gear, and most likely these people were asymptomatic. Airline and airport staff aren't likely to catch COVID-19 compared to the rest of the population. So they don't have any gear, but they're no more likely to get it than anybody else. Those employed in the travel sector are infected at a lower rate than the general population or healthcare workers. So of course healthcare workers are going to have a high rate of infection because they're with sick people all the time. And they're also getting run down and exhausted. Quote, we still believe, looking at the data, that the force of infection here, the major driver, is people who are symptomatic, unwell, and transmitting to others along the human-to-human route. That's Dr. Mike Ryan of the World Health Organization Emergencies Program. So let's look at all the factors there. You got to be symptomatic. You're feverish. You're coughing. You're not well, and you're out there in confined spaces in contact with other people. That's the people that are causing the spread. Can we stop those people? Yeah, of course we can. If the symptoms are so close to other less fatal coronaviruses, what is the positivity rate of those tested? 93% of people who think they are positive aren't. Looking at the success of South Korea and Singapore, the important tool in our war chest is measurement. If we are concerned about the general non-infected population, what is the probability that those who show symptoms actually test positive? What is the chance that the cough from your neighbor is COVID-19? This conversion rate will show whether or not you have a cold, another coronavirus, or heading to isolation for 2 weeks. All right? So you got this thing going on. What's the chances that you've got it? Global data shows that 95%, approximately, of the people who are tested are not positive. So you got symptoms, you get tested, and 95% of the people that have symptoms are not positive for this virus. UK, 0.2%. Another UK test, 4%. So 4% of all the people that got tested actually had the thing, who were already sick. They were sick with something. Italy, it's a 5%, only 5%. Another Italian test, only 3%. Another, the Iceland test, 5.7, and on it goes. So even people that are sick who get the test turn out not to have this particular virus. And I think I can stop here, because this thing just goes on and on and on. Have you heard anything that is hysterical or is coming from a non-validated source? No. Everything's coming from Johns Hopkins, from the CDC, from the World Health Organization, from physicians, from people who are expert in epidemics. So I have to ask the question again, why was this article censored by Medium.com after 2.5 million views? Why is Twitter telling people who click on the link that there's something dangerous about this article? All right, here's something else we need to read. 1% of cases will be severe. Looking at the whole funnel from top to bottom, approximately 1% of everyone who is tested for COVID-19 within the U.S. will have a severe case that will require a hospital visit or long-term admission. I don't know where that quote's coming from. Globally, 80 to 85% of all cases are mild. These will not require a hospital visit, and home-based treatment, no treatment is effective. As of mid-March, the U.S. has a significantly lower severity rate than other countries. Our current severe caseload is similar to South Korea. This data has been spotty, however, lower severity is reflected in the U.S. COVID-19 fatality rates. I think he's quoting the hysterical stuff. So early reports from CDC suggest that 12% of COVID cases need some form of hospitalization, which is lower than the projected severity rate of 20%. For context, this year's flu has led to at least 17 million medical visits and 370,000 hospitalizations out of 30 to 50 million infections. That's a rate of 0.1%. So we've got this year, we have a flu, the regular old flu, created 17 million medical visits. Those 17 million medical visits created 370,000 hospitalizations out of a estimated total of 30 to 50 million infections. Recalling that only comparing aggregate total cases isn't helpful. Breaking down active cases on a per capita basis paints a different picture on severity. And he gives the chart there. Singapore does this. They tell you in the news every day how many people have it, how many people no longer have it, so you can tell the difference between the total number of cases that have ever occurred and how many cases we actually have. Declining fatality rate. Lots of charts. I'm not going to be able to, there's just all charts. So according to him, and he's getting this stuff again from absolutely valid sources, the fatality rate is declining. What should we do? Okay, let's get to this point. The first rule of medicine is to do no harm. Local governments and politicians are inflicting massive harm and disruption with little evidence to support their draconian edicts. Every local government is in a mimetic race to one-up each other in authoritarian city ordinances to show who has more abundance of caution. Oh my God, this guy is very articulate and it's just stated the case with absolute perfection. Wow. Politicians are competing, not on more evidence or more COVID-19 cures, but for more caution. And as unemployment rises and families feel unbearably burdened already, they feel pressure to, quote, fix the situation they created with even more radical and creative policy solutions. This only creates more problems and an even larger snowballing effect. The first place to start is to stop killing the patient and focus on what works. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Okay. I just lost my place. It's a lot of reading. Are you glad someone's reading it to you? You know, so at least you're hearing it. I hope so. So what should we do? Okay, start with basic hygiene. The most effective means to reduce spread is basic hygiene. Most Americans don't wash their hands enough and aren't aware of how to actually wash their hands. True. Could we have a little public service announcement on TV every hour, on the hour, just teaching everybody? We could. CNN going to do it? No. Is Fox going to do it? No. They're going to peddle hysteria. Masks are not particularly effective if you touch your eyes with infected hands. Ask business and public places to freely distribute disinfectant wipes and hand sanitizer to the customers and patrons. If you get sick or feel sick, stay home. These are basic rules for preventing illness that doesn't require trillions of dollars. More data. The best example of defeating COVID-19 requires lots of data. We are very behind in measuring our population, that's us, the U.S., and the impact of the virus, but this has turned a corner in the last few days. The swift change in direction should be applauded. Private companies are quickly developing and deploying tests much faster than the CDC could ever imagine. Let me read that again. Private companies are quickly developing and deploying tests much faster than lazy, overpaid, overstuffed bureaucrats could ever imagine. The inclusion of private businesses in developing solutions is creative and admirable. Data will calm nerves and allow us to utilize more evidence in our strategy. Got to have data. You know, if you're at war, you got to know where the enemy is, with what level of strength. You cannot just thrash around and do stuff. Once we have proper measurement implemented, the ability to test hundreds every day in a given metro, let's add even more data into the funnel and reopen public life, open schools. Closing schools is counterproductive. The economic cost for closing schools in the U.S. for 4 weeks could cost between $10 and $47 billion and lead to a reduction of 6 to 19% of key health personnel. Someone's got to take care of these kids. Based on transmission evidence, children are more likely to catch COVID-19 in the home than at school. As well, they are more likely to expose older vulnerable adults as multi-generational homes are more common. As well, the school provides a single point of testing for a large population for possible infection in the home to prevent community spread. So we got all these kids in one place, we can test them. If somebody's got it, we can do something about it. Open up public spaces. With such little evidence of prolific community spread and our guiding healthcare institutions reporting the same results, shuttering the local economy is a distraction and arbitrary with limiting accretive gain outside of greatly annoying millions and bankrupting hundreds of businesses. And the only thing I'll say there, everything he's written has been great. It ain't hundreds of businesses. It is tens of thousands of businesses that are going to be bankrupted by this. Okay, back to the reading. The data is overwhelming at this point that community-based spread and airborne transmission is not a threat. We don't have significant examples of spreading through restaurants or gyms. When you consider the environment COVID prefers, isolating every family in their home is a perfect situation for infection and transmission among family members. Evidence from South Korea and Singapore shows that it is completely possible and preferred to continue on with life while making accommodations that are data-driven, such as social distancing and regular temperature checks. Support business and productivity. The data shows that overwhelmingly, the overwhelming majority of working population will not be personally impacted, both individually or their children. This is an unnecessary burden. What we're doing is an unnecessary burden that is distracting resources and energy away from those who need it most. By preventing Americans from being productive and specialize at what they do best, their vocation, we are pulling resources toward unproductive tasks and damaging the economy. We will need money for this fight. Americans won't have the freedom to go help those who get sick, volunteer their time in hospitals, or give generously to charities. Instead, big government came barreling in like a bull in a china shop, claiming they could solve COVID-19. The same government that continued to not test incoming passengers from Europe and who couldn't manufacture enough tests with 2 months' notice. Let Americans be free to be part of the solution, calling us to a higher civic duty to help those most in need and protect the vulnerable, not sitting in isolation like losers. Okay, so I'm going to read just a few bullet points here. I think the guys made the point beautifully. People fear what the government will do, not an infection. Next, expand medical capacity. And then he says, don't let them forget this and vote. And maybe that's where he got in trouble. Anyway, this is a brilliant article. We have the link below. I'm going to hope it's still up, but it has been punished for being posted, so we don't know what will happen to this thing. 2.5 million people have read it. You now have heard it, and I have to ask this question again. I know I'm being a little redundant, but did you hear anything hysterical in here? Did you hear anything fear-mongering? Did you hear him drawing from unnamed sources? Did you hear him playing fast and loose with math? No, he didn't. No, he didn't. So this is Brass Check. Share this with folks. Not everybody's a reader. Make sure everybody has a chance to be aware of this.